everyone. Today I have with me writer, producer, author Glenn Benest. Thank you, Glenn. Thanks for being with me today.
Pleasure. It's a pleasure.
And you are best known for your screenwriting, and you do a book out that's how I found you, was from your book. So, but you are a screenwriter, and you have an awesome website where you hold webinars for screenwriting, and you also teach at the American Film Institute too, right?
Well, I used to teach at the American Film Institute and at UCLA, but I found out that these classes were too large. So I started creating my own screenwriting workshops. So I have they're very limited to like 5 or 6 writers, so everybody gets a lot of time. We do those private screenwriting workshops here in Los Angeles, and I also do private consultations with writers all over the world.
Wow.
So,
well,
yeah.
Of course, when I saw that, I was wondering if you knew Richard Walter, who I had interviewed way back. Like, he was like my second interview. And you do?
I know him, yes.
Oh, okay. Because when I saw that, of course, I thought of him, and he's so awesome. So anyway, so yeah, I heard about those, like what you did with like 5 or 6 people, and I was like, that is really interesting because a lot of them are so filled. Like, I've interviewed a lot of screenwriters who hold webinars, and there'll be like 50 to 100 people in one of those. So I really think it's awesome how you do it with such few amount of people, and they get that much attention from you and your feedback.
Well, yeah, when you're, it's one thing to lecture. I do these webinars on different topics, or I'll give introductory lectures, but that only goes so far. I mean, you can read all the books you want and hear all the lectures you want, but you don't really learn anything until you actually start writing screenplays. And then you need good feedback. You're only as good, and this is, for me as a screenwriter myself, I was only successful when I had producers or directors that I was working with, like Wes Craven, who gave me really good feedback. And then my screenplays got better and better and better, and those were the ones that got produced. And I also worked with producers or directors who weren't able to really give great notes, and those screenplays never got produced. So you really need to work with somebody who's a professional, who really knows how to analyze screenplays and is creative as well, that can give you creative feedback and help you solve the problems that you're having.
Yeah, and when I was looking up everything for this interview, I didn't even realize that Wes Craven is no longer with us.
Yeah, Wes died a couple of years ago.
Yeah, I wasn't even aware of that. And that is not like my genre, scary movies, because I don't really like scary movies that much. But I have to say, like, his scary movies were a little bit different than other people's scary movies. And, there was a lot more meat to them than just trying to be scary for the sense of being scary. You know?
Exactly. He was not only was he a great director, probably the greatest horror director, one of the greatest horror directors, but he was a great writer. So he knew how to develop characters and all that sort of thing. It wasn't just about scaring people. It was telling a really good story. And like Nightmare on Elm Street and Scream and the best movies that he did.
Right.
He told a great story.
Right.
And those are the horror movies that I like. But I've worked in every genre, whether it's comedy, whether it's suspense, whether I've done westerns. I mean, I've done every possible genre. And during that time, I really, when I was really, really active as a screenwriter, I was just so involved in getting jobs and all that sort of thing that I didn't spend as much time really looking at stories and going, what makes a great story? What's really the essence of what you need to do? What's the difference between a mediocre story, a mediocre screenplay, and a great screenplay? And it really comes down to character and evoking emotion. the more emotion you feel, whether it's a horror movie, it's an action movie, it's a suspense thriller, it's how closely you identify with the protagonist and how emotionally you get caught up in the story. And that's what people seem to not understand, that's really the core. And there are many techniques that help you do that, help you root for your protagonist and get involved in the protagonist's journey, and that's what you absolutely have to have. And I don't care how good your plot is, it's really, when you think of a great movie, you don't really remember the dialogue so much, but you really remember the characters and how closely you identified with those characters. So that's what I keep trying to help with the writers that I work with, is finding that identification and going deeper and deeper into the characters. And that's not to say that we don't want a good plot. Of course we want a good plot. And we want great dialogue. And we want all those other things. But if we don't have that rooting interest for the protagonist, it doesn't matter how good your plot is, it doesn't matter how great your dialogue is, the story is not going to really work. So and so I just try to go deeper and deeper into the characters and to the emotions that they're eliciting in the audience.
Yeah, and I can hear your passion for, wanting to teach other people how to do that, which is amazing. And there's a lot of people out there who want to be screenwriters, but it's so difficult. It's such a difficult craft to learn, and to even get a movie made is, that's an incredible thing. But I mean, I've gone to a lot. I mean, I haven't written one, but I love it. I love it as an art form. I love, because I'm a reader, and I love to read screenplays, and I love to read books about screenplays. So it's just an amazing, when you read a bad screenplay, I'm starting to understand why it's bad as opposed to a good screenplay.
Right.
Just that alone, just as a reader, So
well,
anyway.
it's a very specific art form. It's probably closer to poetry than anything else, because in 110 pages, you're telling a story with a beginning, middle, and end. You're developing a protagonist. You're creating a structure. You've got twists and turns, and it ends with a very satisfying climax. In a novel, you have pages and I just wrote a novel, so I'm very aware of that. You have a lot of leeway. You can go into the person's backstory. You can talk about people's thoughts, and we can't do that in a screenplay. We can't tell you what people's thoughts are. We can only really, paint pictures for people and explain what somebody is feeling through what they're doing and what we see on screen. So we only have a limited amount of time. It's like I said, it's a very, succinct art form, and it's very difficult to tell a story that a novelist could take 500 pages. We only take 100 pages, and yet it has to have all the elements of what a good novel would be, And that's very difficult. That's like in poetry, it's similar to that, because it's a very limited. You don't have a lot of room. It's very short, and yet you're writing in imagery, and visual imagery, and you're capturing something that somebody could leave feeling very satisfied with. So it's not like any other art form. It really isn't. It's a very, you have to be very succinct in the way that you say things, and it has to evoke a lot of emotions, and that's not easy to do.
And with a screenplay, it's like every sentence matters. You can't waste sentences,
Exactly. And so when I'm working with writers, when we get toward the later drafts, like when it's close to being done, then I have them go literally through every line of narrative, every line of dialogue, and say, if I cut that line, is that going to affect the story or the characters? And if it doesn't, then I say cut it. You know, because we just really want to, we want the read to be as absolutely as clean and smooth as it can possibly be. We don't want anything that's extraneous. So we get rid of all the mediocre lines, all the mediocre dialogue, and we just end up with the very best. And that's sometimes hard for writers because, you know, they fall in love with a line, you know, or they don't want to read something, right? But we're all about getting down to the essence.
Mm-hmm.
So
Wow.
the less narrative, the better. If we can cut dialogue, especially in scenes, you'll notice with a lot of screenplays that you can get into the scene later and you can end the scene earlier. And a lot of writers want to write the beginning of the scene. And I always tell them, start in the middle. Start the scene when it's really getting good. Not, you know, hello, hi, how are you, this is Joe, you know. You don't need dialogue like that. Let's get into the scene when it's really getting dramatic. And let's end the scene at the highest point we can end the scene. That's what generally is called the button of the scene. We want to end the scene at a high point, at a real punctuation. And we just don't want the scene to kind of dribble off into nothing. And so we want to start later. A lot of times we want to end earlier. And like I say, it's so much. I mean, when you're doing a first draft, you don't care about a lot of that stuff. You know, you just want to get it down on paper, and don't inhibit yourself. Don't worry about, is this good, is it not good? No first draft is any good. I don't care how good the writers are. Nobody's first draft is good. So just get it down on paper. And then once you have that, hopefully you're working with a professional, give you good feedback, and don't give your script to your girlfriend or your husband or your best friend. That can be a disaster. They're not going to they don't know how to criticize the script.
Right.
Give it to a professional, somebody who knows. Like if you had a problem with your car, would you take your car to just anybody?
Right.
You would take it to a mechanic who knows cars. So if you have a screenplay, are you going to give it to somebody who knows nothing about screenplays? That would be ridiculous. And yet people do that. They give it to their best friend. Oh, read this and tell me what you think. It's like, well, that guy's not qualified to read screenplays. He could give you feedback that could send you, if you actually listen to that person, he could give you feedback that would send you 6 months backwards because you're listening to feedback that's not legitimate. So I used to do that when I was a beginning writer. I just wanted anybody to read my screenplays. I would give it to my girlfriend. I would give it to, you know, and they would give me feedback. And a lot of times it was really bad. And I would listen to them. And I would rewrite based on their criticism. And it was like it got worse. My screenplays got worse, not better. So it wasn't until I met Wes Craven that I was lucky enough to meet. And he actually knew about screenwriting and about screenplays and about things like that. And he would, you know, guide me through the process. And then I actually got a film made. But it was only because of Wes, you know. So everybody has to find a mentor of some sort. Just like great athletes have coaches, every great athlete has a coach. So every great musician has some sort of a coach. Every great singer has a coach. So every great screenwriter should have a coach because you're just too close to the material. You need somebody who really understands this craft, who can give you really good feedback so that your screenplay gets better and better and better. Same with a great runner. They all have coaches. Why is that? Because they can't figure it out. They need an outside opinion who's really knowledgeable that can look at their running and go, okay, your running is good, but you need to win an Olympic medal.
Mm-hmm.
How are we going to get there? And those coaches know how to get their athletes to that point. Well, it's the same with screenwriting. Everybody needs that outside eye that can bring their product and make it better and better and better.
Which brings me to, how did you meet Wes Craven?
I had a screenplay called Deadly Blessing,
mm-hmm.
and he had directed the first thing that I ever wrote, which was a TV movie. And so we got to know him. And I was working for the company that made that TV movie. So we had this feature that I wrote, this horror movie, and we said to Wes, would you direct this? And because he already knew us and we had a good relationship, he said, sure. So he said, okay, but I'm going to help you to do rewrites. And I was like delighted, great, because I knew it wasn't there. I knew it needed to be better. So he, led me through those rewrites.
Wow.
So
that's awesome.
Yeah, and he wasn't anybody at that point. I mean, he was just a beginning director. He had done a couple of low-budget horror movies that were actually quite good, but they were, very independent, not beautifully produced or anything like that. But you could tell that he had that talent. So we hired him to do the TV movie. It was called Stranger in Our House. It did very well as a TV movie. And then we got him attached to this film.
I think I saw that movie. Now that you say that, I really do think I saw that movie. That's crazy.
Which one?
Back to Stranger in Our House.
Yeah, Stranger in Our House. Yeah.
Yeah, well, because what year was it made?
Oh, my God, this was, a long time ago. This was like in the early 80s or something.
Yeah, and that's, I'm 52, so that would have been my time of watching TV movies. So I really think I saw that movie. That's crazy.
Oh, yeah.
Which I feel, if it's the one I'm thinking of, it was very scary. So.
Yeah, well, that's what Wes was known for, scary movies.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Well, okay, so I have to talk about ink because this is how I found you. And first of all, I seem to be finding these books lately that, knowing nothing about you as an author, I can already tell that you have screenwriting skills. Like, I knew nothing about you, right? I read this book, and I was like, I bet he's a screenwriter. Because, first of all, it's under 300 pages, and that's a good indication right there. And there is not a sentence. This book is incredible. I mean, I am going to tell everybody about this book. And I know it came out in 2015, and I'm not even sure how I stumbled upon it, but I just loved the story in this book, and it's like, you need to write another one. Like, you need to write a continuation of this book because it's so amazing. Has anybody else ever said that to you?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I'm not a novelist, but I always wanted to write a novel just to see what it was like, just to have the luxury of writing about people's thoughts and getting deeper into the characters. So you can go into these, diversions of people's backstory and their thoughts and things you can't do in a screenplay. So I always thought, well, that would be cool to try that. And I just wanted, to give it a shot. And it took a lot longer than I thought it would take because I didn't really know what I was doing. And
Wow. For everybody out there who hasn't read this book yet, but you should read this book, it's about Brian, who's a guy that is a comic book writer. And I love the way you went back and forth between his writing of his comic book and then his real life. And then the last quarter of the book, I could not turn the page fast enough. I mean, I thought I knew where it was going, and I was like I read it twice. I read the last quarter of the book twice, just to make sure I didn't miss anything. Because I was like, it took an incredible turn to this amazing story that I've never read a book like it, and I read a lot of books, so that's telling you something.
Well,
that's telling you what needs to be out there, you know. So
that's awesome.
And you co-wrote it, so I was wondering how that went.
Well, yeah, because I've done a lot of screenplays with a co-writer, and so I didn't think it would be that difficult. And what we would generally do is one person would write one chapter, and then he would send it to the other person, and then they would edit it or whatever, and then we would send things back and forth. It was kind of like that. And it worked pretty well. It wasn't that big of a problem. Sometimes, you know, if you're not seeing the exact same story as your co-writer, it can be a problem. But if you both see the same story and you have similar styles of writing, especially when they add things that you would have never thought of, then it's great. You know, when they have points of view or they go into areas that you never thought, you know, you would never do that. But it works. And so you go, oh, wow. They have, in other words, if they have strengths that you don't have, and that's what makes a great writing partnership in screenplays too. Like if you have a partner that you're working on a script with, and they're really good with dialogue, and you're really good with story, then that's a good partnership. They, you know, your dialogue isn't as good as theirs, but you really understand structure and story. Well, that's a great relationship there, because you know you have different skills. But you don't want a partnership with somebody that has exactly the same skills you have. If you both are great with dialogue, but nobody's that strong with story, then that's not as good, right?
Right.
Or even if your partner is a great promoter and business type person, you know what I mean? They love to get out and sell stuff. They love to talk to people. They love to promote. They love to meet people and sell, you know, and you're kind of inhibited and you're not good at that. Well, that's good too, because they're going to get out there and promote your material in a way that you wouldn't have been able to. So that's actually a pretty good relationship as well. But they have to have skills you don't have, because otherwise, why do you need them? You know, you can do it by yourself.
Right. And that, you know, I was kind of thinking that because of you being a screenwriter, because you don't see very many novels that are written together. You know, that's more true. Like a screen, you know. But did you ever think about making this book into a movie?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah. Good. Good. Because I really want to see this movie. Like, you know, as I'm reading it, I'm like, this is a movie to me. You know?
Well, you've got to go on Amazon and give us a review, because
I will.
Because it sounds like you're going to give us a great review, and that's what we want.
Yeah, you know, I never read reviews. That's another thing I don't do. So sometimes I forget to write reviews because I don't read them. And you know what I mean? But I definitely will. And so did you come up with the concept for this?
No, actually, my writing partner, Dale, he was the one who first came up with the idea. And then we worked on it as a screenplay. And we did pretty well. We never actually sold it as a screenplay, but we got a lot of good feedback from it. And then one of our friends who knew a lot about novels said, you know, this would be the perfect novel. Why don't you write it as a novel? And that's when it kind of, the bulb went off, and I went, you know, I've always wanted to write a novel. Let me give that a shot, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And part of it, what took the longest time was you know, in every novel, this is different than in screenwriting. You don't, in a screenplay, it's not so much the voice, of the narrator talking to you. Like, is it a first person? Is it third person? Is it third person omniscient? There's different voices you can pick to tell a novel. In a screenplay, you don't really have to worry about that too much. It's always kind of third person. So we both experimented with different ways of telling it. Should it be in the first person? Should it be, And then we picked that his comic book hero spoke in the first person, but he was in the third person, the protagonist.
Right.
And that was unusual,
Yeah.
That made it unusual, which I like, because it's not the typical way of telling a story. And it was when we figured that out that it really started to work, really.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because, and when you first start the book, I feel like, when you're reading the story that he's writing, and I thought that's what it was going to be about. And then the going back, and it's just amazing. It's awesome. And I am looking at your Amazon, and you have, stellar reviews here. Everybody agrees with me. So
yeah, no, we had very good feedback. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, and then of course we did a lot. We got a lot of people to give us feedback. Readers like you who understand novels and understand what makes a good novel, which are different than people who understand what a great screenplay. So we got readers who gave us feedback, and then we do rewrites based on those notes. And we did that until we were confident that we really kind of had it. And then it was a matter of going through it and making sure that there were no typos, there were no misspellings, all that. That took a long time because it's not like in a screenplay. There's so much narrative that you really want to make sure that you're using the right italics for the right things and the right rules of grammar and all that stuff. So that took a good while too. Because I know when I read a novel and I see a misspelling or I see something ungrammatical, it bugs me.
Oh yeah.
Somebody should have caught this.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm one of those people too.
Yeah. So that takes a good while too.
Yeah. And so I talk to so many screenwriters that's kind of the feedback. I'm working with this one guy right now that he did the same thing. He wrote a screenplay and then, shopped it around, and then they were like, oh, this should be a novel. So now he's turning his screenplay into a novel, but he said now that he's doing that, everybody's like, this should be a screenplay. He's like, it is a screenplay.
That's funny. Yeah.
So I know that's a lot of the feedback that people give, screenwriters. And, it's just kind of funny because it just depends on who wants to do it, whether it's going to be a movie or it's going to be a book,
Right. Well, I tell you, if you adapt into a novel, you get to know the characters on a much deeper level. Because, like I was saying, in a screenplay, you can't get into characters' thoughts.
Right.
In a novel, that's mostly what novels are, which are people's thoughts into their inner world. You get into their inner world. And once you do that, the characters just get way deeper. That's why most people, when they read a novel, which they love, and then they see the movie, they're disappointed.
Yes.
It's like, the novel was so much richer. It was so much deeper. And that's usually true because the author has that luxury of getting into people's thoughts and into their inner worlds. And, they can go on, as long as it's interesting, you go into their childhood, you can do all kinds of things,
Yeah, and I've always found that the movies that I do like from a novel is if they can get an actor that doesn't have to say a lot of dialogue, but it's portraying what I read, like that I can kind of tell, like Girl on the Train or something, that you get a really good actor or actress that they're not saying the words from the novel, but you can tell that they're taking on that character that you knew and loved so well in the book. And that's how I feel about Brian in the book. Like, it would take a tremendous actor to get across his story and to feel. I mean, I felt like I was him. I was like living him, you know. I could feel all his anxiety and all his issues, and, you know, he was just such a great character, you know.
Yeah, it's great. It's so great when you read a book and you just can't wait to read the next. You know, it's like, tomorrow I get to read the next few chapters. You know,
right?
You just can't wait to keep turning those pages. You know, that's what's so great about books.
Yeah, and so I really do hope that you guys write another one based with him as the main character and continue the story. But that's just my opinion. So.
Well, no, that's thanks for saying that.
And I will write that in my Amazon review too, so that you can see it there whenever you are thinking about that. You know, you're kind of bored, don't know what to do next. Then you can think about that.
Okay. Well, there's a lot of more stories that can be there. It's way wide open. You know, there's a lot more that can be told.
Yes.
Characters and whatnot. Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Glenn. This has been amazing. It was so much fun talking to you, and I know that all the screenwriters who are listening have gained so much knowledge about, you know, what to do with their screenwriting. And I will post the links to for your website so that people can go there and see what webinars you are hosting. You do have a Facebook page also.
Yeah, and anybody that is in LA, especially if they interested in taking a screenwriting workshop, please, you know, get in contact with me. Or even if they live, like I work with writers. Like I said, I have one writer I'm working with lives in Palo Alto. I have another writer that I'm working with lives in Florida. So I work with writers, you know, all over the country, and I help guide them through the process of writing screenplays. So anybody that's interested in that, you know, please call me or email me or something. That would be great.
Okay, great. Well, thank you so much, Glenn, and I hope we hear from you more writing, more on this book, and I can't wait.
Okay, thanks so much.